Hi, I'm Terry Slevin. I'm the editor of Ethical Corporation magazine, and I'm here with Barry Parkin, who heads up procurement and sustainability at Mars. The title of this session is rather provocatively the end of the commodity era. Now, Barry, you and I spoke about what this means in the context of palm oil a while back for something we were doing in the magazine a few months ago. Can you explain to our viewers what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. And good to meet you, Terry, and everybody out there. We're obviously all challenged by the COVID crisis, and but it's good to talk about something else. But I'm sure we're going to come back to COVID shortly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the end of the commodities era. This is a thought that we've had over the last couple of years, and the idea here is that we've been buying commodities, raw materials, us and all of our peers, in a similar way for hundreds of years. We've treated them as materials of often unknown origin. We don't know exactly where they come from. They're bought and traded on through markets, and we don't know what's been going on at the beginning of those supply chains. That's the reality of how we bought many of these materials over years. And our view is that's no longer tenable, and for a number of reasons. The first one is that there is a major pull demand for transparency, whether that's from consumers, from customers, from governments, from NGOs. There is a demand, quite rightly, for where is this material coming from and under what conditions is it being produced, and that leads to us and all of our peer companies getting to the bottom of where it really comes from. And when we do that, we often uncover one or more issues that need solving, and therefore we need to invest in those supply chains, and we need to invest fundamentally with the farmers at the beginning of the supply chain. And that means that there's an obvious logic that we don't want to invest multiple times. So we need to go from a situation of materials of unknown origin to materials of known and verified, traced origin, and that leads us to working longer term with the farmers, longer term with the partners along the way, and no longer buying these in sort of short-term leveraged arrangements, and therefore no longer a commodity. So this whole world of commodities that's grown over the last couple of years, we think is no longer fit for purpose. We need a different supply chain model for the future. Perhaps the best way is to illustrate that with an example. And the way we've approached palm, it's a challenging material. We use about 0.1% of the world's supply of palm, so not very much. But yet, in the past, we bought from about 50% of the palm mills out there. There's about 3,000 palm mills in the world. We bought from 1,500 of them. So how ridiculous is that? We're buying 0.1%, but potentially from 50% of the supply base. And we, like everybody else, couldn't really say what was going on at the beginning of those supply chains. So we've embarked on a mass simplification, where we're going from 1,500 palm mills to 100 by the end of this year, and probably to somewhere around 20 at the end of our simplification. And the reason we're doing that is we believe that's the only way that we can ensure we really know what's going on in that supply chain. We really can say that we're ending deforestation. We really can say that we understand any human rights issues, and we've got programs in place to address them. So that is therefore no longer a commodity. We are buying from a few suppliers on long-term relationships. We've excluded the suppliers who don't share our values, and we've taken this from what was a pure play commodity to almost a virtually vertical integration, where we know the farmers, we know the plantations, we know the mills that are in our supply chain. And I see us doing that in more and more materials over time, and I see it happening with other companies in other materials.
Okay, I guess one question and one criticism of this approach that I saw during my research when I was looking at palm oil was the concern that if you are just sourcing from big industrial RSPO certified palm oil plantations. That, well, like Amnesty International Rainforest Action Network was saying that there are lots of potentially human rights issues with them because they import labor, and you're also excluding the smallholders by going to
well, I think the answer to the first one is that, yeah, I think the reality is there are human rights issues endemic across that industry and most industries in that part of the world. So you have to get to the bottom of what those issues are, and the way you do that is by concentrating your efforts into a fewer number of supply chains. There's no way that we could do due diligence across 1,500 mills with potentially 2,000 plantations behind them. So if we're going to do our job properly across whatever the issues are, the only way we do that is if we simplify the supply chain and we get down to a number of partners who we are confident in and are confident that they have the right processes and procedures in, and to a number where we can be active on the ground and know exactly what's going on. So inherent with whatever the issues are, whether deforestation or human rights, we have to simplify. To the point about smallholders, we're not excluding smallholders. In many of these models, smallholders work in a plasma organization around the plantation. So the plantation sources not only from, the mill sources not only from the plantations, but from the smallholders as well. And we've got programs on the ground with smallholders. So this is not about excluding smallholders.
And say if you're looking at cocoa, for example, that's a very different model. How does it work there?
Well, you're seeing the same trend for the same reasons, that there is a absolute demand for transparency, and in the case of cocoa, it's driven as much by consumers as by governments. So if you want to import cocoa into the US, the US government is going to want to know where it comes from. So we, like all of our peers, are in a process of mapping to the farm level all of the farmers in our supply chain. And cocoa is a smallholder crop. We have about 300,000 cocoa farmers that supply us. We are working our way through that. We're at about 30% of those are mapped, polygon mapped, GPS mapped to the farm level, and we'll complete that over the next couple of years. So we will know exactly which farmers are in our supply chain. And all of our competitors, all of our peers are doing the same thing. And inherently, we're then investing with those farmers. We're investing with them in the usual things, good agricultural practices, but we're also investing with them on child labor monitoring and remediation. So the industry has developed a process of child labor monitoring which actually works. And the evidence is quite clear that it reduces the incidence of child labor by at least 50%, which is not solving it completely, but it's a big step forward. Every one of the industry is committed to now put that in place. So just imagine, with all of those farmers, millions of farmers, each industry player is investing with that farm, with that community in this approach. They don't want to invest twice, three times. So we are inherently all committing to buy from the same farmers in our supply chains going forward. So it's again no longer a commodity. We're inherently entering into a long-term relationship with those farmers and the supply chain partners along the way. And so I'm seeing this material by material as we go through, that these forces of transparency and the need to invest at the farm level are decommoditizing these materials.
So what's the role of certification here?
Well, certification has been around for a while, hasn't it? It's been around for 20 to 30 years. And I think what it's done is it's provided a good base of a standard. But in most cases across all materials and geographies, it doesn't yet equate to sustainable. It provides a minimum set of standards. And whichever material you take, back to palm, RSPO, it's a decent standard, and we, like all of our competitors, are 100% certified and have been for a number of years. But it doesn't equate to zero deforestation. And we're arguing you've got to go much further than that if you're really going to claim that you're zero deforestation in your supply chain. So I think it's been a good start. But what we need to see in most cases is those standards need to strengthen if they're really going to equate to true sustainability. There's some evidence of that. I think I'd call out Rainforest Alliance for their work on cocoa, where they've significantly strengthened their standard in the last few months. But I think we need to see this across more and more materials.
Now, your work within the Consumer Goods Forum, I know you're leading on plastics there, but and you were leading on this work as well. Were you on the deforestation piece?
We're very involved in both the deforestation work stream there and plastic waste one. Our CEO co-sponsors the deforestation work stream, and one of my team, Kevin Rabinovich, is heavily involved in that work stream. So, on deforestation, I think the Consumer Goods Forum come up with a very, very strong new theory of change, which is not only about this sort of deep mapping protocols, policies into the supply chain, but also this idea of clean supplier. And I use that phrase. So not only should a company ensure that its own supply chain is free from deforestation, free from human rights issues, they should demand that their suppliers' entire supply chain, whoever they sell to, is also free. And that's the way that we multiply our impact and we drive system level change. So we have said, and a number of our peers are now saying, we will only buy from suppliers who not only give us a clean supply chain, but sell a clean supply chain to all of their customers. And that is what will drive real scale. I think that's a really powerful new step forward. And you're going to see that play out over the next few years.
So I'm wondering how many companies have actually followed you on this, because one of the problems with the CGF's commitment to end deforestation by 2020 was it didn't actually actively get companies to have to sign up individually to them, did it? But this new approach is to get actively companies to drive this each and within their own company. I mean, Mars has signed up. How many more of the CGF members are doing this?
So the CGF taken a real sea change of approach rather than broad scale commitments of hundreds of members of the CGF, which frankly didn't get a lot achieved. This is very much about coalitions of action now, where the companies that are committed to action sign up together. So I think on deforestation, you'll see 20 to 30 companies that are committed. On plastic waste, we have over 30 companies committed to some bold new actions and commitments. And that's the right approach for me. It's not about, because that ensures that it's a high bar level of commitment. And these commitments, these actions need to be truly stretching and achieving a step change in the industry. So the key for me is critical mass. Have we got a critical mass of companies that can change an industry, reach a tipping point? And if I give you an example on plastic, some of the work that's going on there is about design, and we're coming up with golden design rules. And I can't go into the detail of exactly what they are, but they'll be announced in Q3 this year. Bold changes that manufacturers and retailers agree to that will change what you see in the supermarket. Will make a significant shift both in the reduction amount of plastic, but in the recyclability of plastic. And if you imagine you get a few retailers, the biggest retailers in each country agreeing to do this, then frankly, they will require that all of their suppliers do it. And you quite quickly get to a tipping point. So we think that 20 to 30 companies is plenty to drive a tipping point in most of these industries.
So in deforestation as well?
In deforestation, whether it's in palm or soy or beef or cocoa, if you get a sufficient number, a critical mass of the biggest, the medium-sized companies all pulling in the same direction, and that's not really happened before, then I think we get to a tipping point. That's what we believe. And frankly, that's aligned with the thinking of many of the NGOs in this space who we've consulted extensively. You know, their biggest beef with industry in the past has been, you know, you haven't driven the change in your supply chains, and you haven't required that your suppliers shift with you. And that's why it's a procurement lever. This is not about, you know, programs so much on the ground. This is about fundamental procurement levers being applied into the supply chain.
I'm just wondering, I mean, you've made a commitment by the end of this year, by the end of 2020, you'll have ended deforestation in your supply. I think, was it just palm or in? Yeah,
just palm, because we're saying this is a really high bar. This is not about, is it all certified? This is about, is it really free from deforestation?
So obviously, yeah, sorry, but so obviously COVID-19, not what you expected. How is that impacting your deforestation commitments, and then more broadly, all the other plans that you have?
Yeah, you know, and first thing to say, you know, what an incredible and extremely challenging time for everybody in supply chains. And you know, anybody involved in global supply chains has obviously had an extremely challenging few months. And you know, I wear two hats on this within Mars, both the procurement one to ensuring we keep our factories running and keep them supplied, but also the sustainability one, and the, you know, thinking both short, medium, and long term about all of the actors in the supply chain. You know, we've in the short term, you know, we've been looking very hard about what, you know, where can we help, and you know, where the hotspots are in our supply chain, and we've obviously done all the right things in terms of providing some humanitarian support into the supply chain. It's amazing how resilient those supply chains have been in the short term, though, frankly, and I think we've all been surprised with that. We've been able to get the materials that we normally get, and we've been able to therefore continue to, you know, put our investment into all of these origin countries that we usually bought from. So that's good news. In the medium term, I think we're all trying to make sense of what will this mean to the sustainability agenda. And you know, you can wear your optimist hat or your pessimist hat here. I think, you know, if I wear my optimist hat, then I think there's, you know, it's clear there's been an environmental awakening across, you know, people at large, and that's partly people seeing how fast the environment's improved when heavy industry and transport has closed down. People have seen the Himalayas, you know, from the middle of India they haven't seen before. People have clearly seen the improvement in atmosphere, etc. And people have appreciated being closer to nature and not traveling, commuting into cities. So there's definitely evidence of an environmental awakening, which one would hope would play out into a stronger call for change on climate and other things. I think the whole Build Back Better movement and the idea of, as we reinvest in economies, ensuring that, you know, the green economy and social justice is part of that is, you can see that in some parts of the world. I think in Europe it's very strong, and so that gives me optimism. You know, if I wear my pessimist hat, then clearly the situation's just got worse in many places, and you know, if you're in agriculture as we are, then you know, it's clear that poverty, extreme poverty, will get worse through this, through an economic recession. I think you know, Oxfam talked about 500 million people slipping back into poverty. You know, there's been 1 billion that have moved out of poverty over the last 15 years. 500 million slipping back into poverty. So, you know, these are huge numbers. The risk of human rights issues will undoubtedly go up with, you know, more mass migration, and you know, the challenges of starting supply chains again. So, all of our challenges just got worse. And even if you think about plastic, consumers have, very much valued the protection plastic gives to them, whether around food or personal protection over the last months. And yet we're trying to reduce the amount of plastic in the world. So that's a headwind that we're going to have to work our way through. And then if you think about funding, governments, development agencies are going to have many, many tasks ahead of them, as are corporates. And I'm sure there's a question in the air as to, whether corporates will continue to invest. I can tell you from a Mars point of view, we are absolutely continuing to invest. We are sticking to our guns in terms of the plans and the programs we've got. We've committed $1 billion of investment to kickstart our sustainability programs since we launched our Sustainable Generation Plan. We are investing at that rate, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We committed another $1 billion against our cocoa sustainability effort. We're absolutely continuing to do that. So we think the best thing to do is just to push on with the programs and then adapt as we see the hotspots and the challenges emerge in different places. And actually, I'm quite optimistic about industry's response in general. Whether it's the work that continues on through the Consumer Goods Forum. Next week we're talking to a whole bunch of CEOs from the consumer goods industry, and they're all piling in on new commitments, new investments on packaging, on deforestation. I see no let up in that. And on cocoa, via the World Cocoa Foundation, all the big companies are committing to roll out child labour monitoring, investments on deforestation, investments on livelihoods. So I actually don't see any backing off from industry. The challenge will be to keep the pressure on governments to continue to play their role in this, because it needs to be both industry and governments doubling down on these issues in order to solve them.
The postponement of COP till 2021, it's now in, I think, November, isn't it? As well as the postponement of the biodiversity COP as well. Do you think this is a negative thing, or do you think that there's some silver linings there?
I don't think it's such a big deal. I think the big events are somewhat important. I think it's the work that goes on in between. And interestingly, I actually, many people, senior executives amongst them, have had more time because they're not commuting to offices. They're not traveling all over the world the last month. So I have been in many, many very, very productive Zoom calls with very senior executives and, with development organizations. The work continues. The commitment, the planning continues. I think I think it's less important, the big meetings. What is challenging is work on the ground. And, everybody has had to back off work on the ground to a certain extent, partly because nobody wants to be spreading the virus, and partly because it's just challenging to travel at the moment. So, and there is an amount of travel that's involved in development. So, I think that no doubt in the short term there'll be a slowdown in some of the real impact and change on the ground. But the world will recover, and provided the commitment is there, we just need to re-accelerate when we can in terms of driving change.
And do you think the biodiversity agenda is going to be become more important as a result of COVID-19? And there's been a lot of talk about how deforestation might lead to more of these pandemics in future.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope there's an even clearer link between deforestation and world health. It was probably a in many people's minds, a pretty indirect link in before. You know, deforestation leads to global warming, leads to you know, problems down the road. That probably wasn't that relevant to many, you know, individuals around the world. I think when you make a much clearer link between deforestation can lead to pandemics, I think that is very top of mind. And so I would love to see more consumer activism, more engagement in the topic of deforestation. And biodiversity and deforestation are highly linked, of course. You know, let's hope that this creates more pull, more pressure, more investment to solve the issues.
Has there been, I know that you were part of this, there's a One Planet business coalition on biodiversity?
Yeah, we are, and I think there's good work there, and there is a very close overlap between that piece of work and the CGF deforestation piece. So the deforestation work within the CGF is one of the pillars of the One Planet biodiversity program. Yeah, they're all good programs, and you know, they point the way for what needs to happen. But ultimately, you know, always come back to the fact that individual companies have to get on with it in their supply chains, and you do that by pulling the procurement lever. You know, it's absolutely core to how we are operating. The reason I've got these two jobs is that they are absolutely linked. You know, if we're going to make our supply chain fully sustainable, we have to change what's upstream. 90% plus of our impacts are down to what we buy, whether it's climate related, human rights related, income related. It's embedded in what we buy. So we have to change what we buy, or where we buy it, or how we buy it, if we're going to become a sustainable business. And that's why we've linked procurement and sustainability together.
Are you seeing more companies doing this, linking those two, or bringing those two functions in one hat?
Yeah, I think it's most obvious in food and beverage, because you know, when you map your scope 3 emissions or your supply chain impacts, they're embedded in upstream in food and beverage, in agriculture. So we've seen, you know, in terms of my direct peers, AB InBev, Danone have the same setup as us, so big food and beverage companies. And you know, often I'm in sustainability forums with other companies, and you know, most of the people in the room come from a public affairs background, a government affairs background, or a pure play sustainability background. And I'm always searching for where the procurement executives are, and they're not there typically. And you know, so my challenge to them, as you know, my peers in those groups, is, you know, if the CPO is not your best friend, you will have a problem implementing anything here, because the CPO has to change. You know, the procurement organization has to change what it buys, or where it buys it, or how it buys it, in order to drive the change. So I think that's one of the big trends we need to see. We need to get the procurement executives, you know, deep into this, not just the public affairs executives.
That's great. Barry, I think that's probably as much time as we have this afternoon. Really appreciate you talking to me. And it's always
That's great. Always good to talk to you, Terry. Thanks a lot.
Okay, take care.
Bye.